Adam Kosky started his career in sales and has transitioned over to CS, now leading enterprise and global strategic accounts at Panaseer. Previously, he's worked for brands such as Spotify, Unlocked, and Meta. Today, we discuss how to scale your career and book of business. This episode is packed with value for those deciding on whether they should work for a startup or scale up, as well as huge amounts of insight on how to grow your book of business if you're in account management or customer success. We talk about the difference between being a specialist versus generalist and deciding which company is right for you. We then discuss the foundations your CS team need to have in place to impact the output and value for your client in a positive way, running a CS audit, segmenting your book of business, and working with pre-sales. I hope you love this episode just as much as I did recording it. Let's get into it. Hi guys, welcome to the next episode of Sales Unfiltered. Today I'm joined by the brilliant Adam Kosky. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, pleasure.
Today you're going to be talking about how to scale your career but also your book of business. We thought we'd do a bit of a two-pronged approach. The reason for career is because you've worked for some really interesting brands. Do you want to give us a bit of an insight into some of the companies that you've worked for up until today?
Yeah, so firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I've had an interesting career to date and worked for a bunch of different VC-backed tech startups, scale-ups, and also some bigger companies as well that probably some people have heard of. So Meta and Spotify are probably
Never heard of them. No.
the two ones that most people probably would have heard of. But I guess what's interesting is the other high growth companies that aren't kind of day-to-day names that people don't hear of. That's for me where I've actually probably learned a lot on growth and had a lot of personal kind of enjoyment and satisfaction and probably stretched myself the most from a career perspective.
And the role that you're doing now, how large is the company?
Yep. So currently working for a cybersecurity business. It's a scale up global business. There's about 150 people globally. So that's very much, I would say, in the scale up territory. I've worked for some businesses which are 10 to 15 and you very much in that build stage. So it's kind of like startups and scale ups and what I'd classify as big tech, which most people probably are very much aware of.
Yeah, but I feel like people talk about startups or big tech. They don't really talk about the scale up because there is a difference, isn't there? What are the key differences that you've seen, I guess, from the three companies that you've worked at being startup, scale up and big tech? What are like the main differentiators?
Lots. It's hard to, necessarily exactly, they've all got different DNA. I think if you go from kind of smallest to biggest, you've got startups which traditionally have lower, they've raised some capital. They've got a piece of technology or software. It's, they've got a certain amount of runway to kind of, they've got some angel funding to get off the ground. They've got quite a small team. Traditionally, they wouldn't have like huge, overheads. So we're talking very agile, very nimble business, but huge amount of autonomy. Obviously, a co-founder or team of co-founders that might be a makeup of kind of product, marketing, sales, etc. And you're very much in that arc of, can we get to that next phase? Can we raise more money? Can we show early kind of value proposition? Can we build a business that effectively investors want to invest in and clients want to buy, right? That's kind of your main hurdle that you're trying to hit. Fast forward a few years is kind of where you become a bit more mature. You start to actually hire a bit more experienced and tenured people. You can actually start to build out proper kind of go-to-market teams, especially more like back office people like finance, legal as well, like HR, crucially important functions. And I think that scale up is the really interesting stage, which is you've kind of ticked all those initial boxes. And now it's like, how do we actually get this, is this going to be a sellable business? Is this going to either be acquired or can this actually get to something which is of IPO significance? And that journey is not straight. It can be, very kind of peaks and troughs. And that's where traditionally a lot of scale ups can actually fail because of lots of different reasons. And they always say kind of A team, B product will always trump a B product and an A team, if that makes sense. So you're always looking to, smart people hopefully can work out things, right?
Yeah.
And then going through to bigger tech, my experience at Meta was super interesting. You're in a luxurious position where you've got multiple resources there. You've got process and you've got procedures in place, and you're obviously working with super smart people as well. that's obviously got certain drawbacks because the kind of the ability to do more than 3 people's jobs is kind of limited.
Yeah.
So it depends what you want and depends on different kind of life stages. But for me, just that kind of what we're probably going to get on that generalist kind of lens is something where I've kind of lent into from a personal perspective.
We were saying when we spoke previously about this, of at the moment, like if I was to talk about my job, I feel like I have 10 different roles that I'm doing. When you are working in a smaller business, you kind of are becoming, I guess, a master of all trades and a jack of all trades and a master of none. I always get that the wrong way around, but you end up dipping your toe in so many different pies and trying new things and kind of like trying to find your feet of maybe where can you be a specialist. And then when you do work for those larger companies, you can feel like, right, I've now understood my niche and I know where I'm at, and that is going to be something that I'm going to focus on. And you said that you're reading this book called Range by David Epstein. Don't worry, I'm not going to test you on it because he was like, I've not finished it. But there was a quote that I saw which was interesting that said, specialists are often too close to a problem to see the bigger picture. Generalists step back and connect the dots. So at the moment, would you say that you're a generalist or a specialist?
So caveat, definitely haven't read the whole book.
Do you not remember that quote?
I'm an old school reader, so I read like books as opposed to the Audible and fast forward, which I probably should do because I'll get through more books than that.
I ChatGPT'd that quote, so don't worry.
There you go.
That's the best way.
So I think I've always been curious. And I think that's in my kind of earlier part of my career. I've wanted to have exposure to lots of things. That's probably because I need that stimulation. I like fast pace. That's kind of why I gravitated rather towards startups and tech, because things move fast quickly.
Yeah.
And I thrive off that. And that for me feeds my kind of personal attributes. I personally, I haven't intentionally tried to be a generalist. I just think that's the way it's carried out. And when I say generalist, I mean, you can be almost that T-shaped. I don't know if you've heard that T-shaped kind of phrase. So your kind of linear is something that you like, your craft, that is your fundamental like super strength.
Yeah.
And for me, that's very much like partnerships and go to market, customer success, building relationships, even at more than one. But that's kind of for me once and the same. And then the thing on top, the T on top is what else can you add to that can make you a more rounded individual, both personally and professionally. So you might, be super interested in learning languages. That's very relevant for lots of different global companies right now. You might have a strength at design or art, or, I'm just making some examples here. So for me, I'd rather have a more rounded kind of skill set.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I fully appreciate that, if you want to be a doctor, you've got to learn how to be a doctor. If you want to be a dentist or a lawyer, I think there's some very vocational careers. But certainly for me, when I left uni a long time ago, that kind of straight path of a lawyer or a dentist or like an accountant, it didn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why I've navigated in tech. And I think tech, like you said, it can feed that generalist appetite.
And very much like the entrepreneurship element, which you've definitely touched into with your consultancy. But what is on the top of your tea, would you say, aside from being passionate about sparkling water? For anybody that doesn't know, that is your passion.
Yep.
That, spas, the Cotswolds, these are all the things that we've been discussing.
Yeah. This isn't product placement.
I know.
If San Pellegrino want to do like an influencer,
get in touch. Yeah, maybe hashtag ad for this episode. But what would you say are those things that you, outside of partnerships and go-to-market, are your extra interests?
It's a really good question. So something that comes to mind is firstly like mentoring and coaching. It's just for me like giving back. I know it sounds a little bit cheesy, but I've relied on people and people have helped me in the past.
Yeah.
And I just love that idea that you can pay it forward. You can contribute and give back, and it does, you might take half an hour or 45 minutes of your time to help someone. Maybe on a ad hoc basis, or it could be, I know you've got a mentor and you've listened to that episode. So you can reap the rewards on a continuous basis, but it could just be a 45-minute chat or a half an hour chat with someone that's never met you, that wants to maybe get into your industry, and you can give them a wealth of data and a wealth of information. And I benefited from that in the past, and I like to pay it forward and try and help people. So I'm part of a few different initiatives like mentoring schemes. which is more about like school leavers who are 16, 17, 18 and just trying to contribute towards that. And that sits like high on my bucket list from a T-shape. But more importantly, probably from a personal perspective, it's things like AI, trying to lean into that as much as I possibly can outside and inside of my work. And obviously looking at just upskilling on CS. I think it's not a one flavor kind of skill set. And I know listening to a lot of your podcasts, it's, I think what I've learned is that CS is very different and very varied in different organizations.
Yeah.
So you've obviously got like partner success, you've got the pre-sales part of CS, you've got the post-sales, you've got the deployment implementation. There's very different like slices of that. And I think going back to being a generalist, you don't want to just have one specific skill set in CS. I think you want to have that exposure to the full customer lifecycle.
Yeah.
And try and, if you're not having those experiences, try and identify those experiences. And now for me, it's about like, how do I get access to like P&L and things like that, and start to actually like leverage my kind of influence in businesses, which is another stepping stone in this, in that career journey, which is exciting, right?
And as you said, CS is so broad and it's forever evolving. We're seeing CS no longer just be about retention and satisfaction. It can be about revenue as well, and a lot more CS teams are becoming more revenue mindset. So it is really important that you diversify those skills. Before we, there's a couple of questions I want to talk about. You mentioned about your boredom. I definitely want to get into that. But if we're talking about career success, and people are thinking, right, they look at your career, that you're like, wow, you've worked for Meta, you've worked for Spotify, you've worked for a scale up, and they're thinking about their next move. Do I want to work for a startup, a scale up? Do I want a company that has a bit more of an established brand, or do I want to kind of get my hands dirty and build something exciting and maybe be there from the beginning? What advice would you give to people that are maybe on that precipice of that decision?
I think it depends on your specific like time in your life and what your risk appetite is, and also what the market is dictating as well. So you have to look at the current economic market and what's going on, because what you want might not be what is available in the market.
True.
So just having that lens and patience to understand like when that's gonna change, and if that is likely to change. Obviously, AI is going to have and is having a huge impact. So what does that mean for your role? Whether that you're in finance, whether you're in customer success, you have to evaluate these like huge pivotal market changes. But I think, for me, in my 20s, not revealing my age, cough, cough.
25?
Yeah. You have to understand that there's most startups, not you, but one must understand, and I probably learned this the hard way, that most startups have a year to 2 years of runway at any given time. And that can be for scale, certainly from what, point of one, that's what I've seen with scale up. So you have to be at ease with ambiguity, and some level of, psychological safety is a word that gets thrown around a lot. And especially in today's market, it's quite difficult to attain that. So, when you're maybe more junior in your career, you can afford to take some more, I would say, calculated risks. So like what's your risk appetite? Like, are you, if this company goes and, on a rocket ship, you're there super early, that's very interesting, right? You've maybe got some early equity, you've got in the position early, and that can have a hockey stick growth. That can be super rewarding. That could actually be career defining. If anything, a bit of a regret is probably not staying at Spotify longer. I was there quite, early in their stage, and potentially could have, my career could have gone in a different direction. But I didn't, and that's like a career, like
hindsight.
Is 2020 vision, right? So I to those people thinking, I think with startups it's a graft. You're very exposed. You're, in a 20 to 30 to 100 person business. You have to prove value and impact. But also there's things, variables around you that's going to change. And there might be a change in direction. There might be change in leadership, a change in product, changing in customer focus. And just, you have to be okay with that. And you have to want to thrive in that. Now, the big companies, that's obviously, they obviously have change. And I've got friends that tell me the whole time at bigger companies that shifting gears and there's shifting in strategy. And so I think just tech as a whole, I think does change. And if you're really not someone that enjoys change, then maybe tech is not
your industry.
Yeah, because I think it just comes part and parcel.
That's really interesting, though, that you say that the bigger companies do still have change, because I guess my vision of working for the Metas of the world is that it's very regimented, and it's like you can't go into that business and be creative and entrepreneurial because it's got their systems in place. It's very much you have to follow this like structure, but you're saying else different.
I thought that personally, and I can only talk about my experience, like what I had, and it could be very different in different organizations. But at Meta, I was in the B2B part of the business, which is called Reality Labs. And effectively, that went through a huge pivotal shift from software. We were selling an internal comms platform to hundreds and if not thousands of businesses globally. So like a challenger brand to Teams and Slack. So very like widely adopted tool, mainly used by frontline employees across the world. And we had a paradigm shift where the business was reorged, and we effectively went into the reality labs, but the future of work team. So we started selling hardware and software. So obviously this was about 3 years ago, where like the metaverse was like a very new term in the kind of dictionary of tech. And you know, that was a big change in leadership, a change in direction, how we were structured, what our go-to-market was. And that was, like there was no playbook for that. There wasn't like, I know we've spoken in the past about playbook businesses. There was no playbook because no one was building out VR at the time that Apple
had. The first people,
with Apple and other kind of companies rather. So that was interesting. And I think that allowed creativity, you know, to do demos and experiences, and no one at our company had really done that. So it was very new. And I think that's exciting. So I think you find pockets of that in tech companies. Once again, it depends on what your appetite is and what you're interested in, because things can change, very, very quickly.
And it depends on the organization. You were very lucky that you got an experience where you were able to be creative. And you mentioned that the reason you liked these startups and scale-ups is because you get bored easily. And I think we're very similar in that sense. I always think, though, unless you feel like you're growing or learning, then you are in the wrong job. Like you need to be, I almost think I want to be scared every single day, and I want to try something new and feel a little bit worried, like, is this going to work? Because otherwise I'm not challenging myself. I'm just doing the same thing over and over, and it's almost just like copy and paste. But when we're talking about people in their careers at the moment, and we're living in a generation, and this is stereotyping, but of kind of people getting very impatient easily and not having a huge attention span and wanting success straight away because we've got so much at the tip of our fingers. How would you advise people if they are feeling like a little bit bored in their role, that it's actually maybe that they are bored, but that's just because they're impatient, or no, actually, this probably is time for you to move on because you're not learning anything new?
It's a really, really good question. I think there's two things that come to mind. I think the first thing is evaluating, are you learning or earning? Ideally, you want to do both.
Yeah.
I've tried, it's important. That's important to me, and might not be important to others, but I try and learn and earn. And I guess you want it. If you're not, are you indexing for one? And I guess for me, if I'm not indexing for both, then for me that's a sign for me, and that kind of triggers something in me to try and change that. I think the other part of that is crawl, walk, run, and to be patient, but to understand where you are now, where do you need to be, and how you're going to get there. And I think like with tech, things can change. People can leave, products can change very, very quickly. You can be repositioned, and you can position yourself to be somewhere where maybe you want to be more of. So I think just like having that like zoom out, having that like perspective of, okay, where am I now, and actually where do I want to get to, and can this company give me what effectively what you're looking for, like you said, and those growth. And if not, sometimes you have to go searching for that. People aren't always, even the best managers, and I've had some really good managers in the past, massive like influence on me personally, and they've helped champion you and cheerlead you. Not all managers can have the time or the bandwidth to always do that. So you have to kind of, you have to take proactivity of your own career. And I think you've probably done that massively, right? To get to where you want to be.
I was going to say, I really agree with that, because you said, can the company help me get there? But also I think people need to take ownership a lot more themselves and go, right, yes, can the company help me and support me to get there? But what am I going to do get myself there, because managers want to support their reps as much as physically possible, and they want them to have the best careers and best opportunities. But unless you speak up and say, I really want to do this, and you reference my role, I started in recruitment at Wiser Elite. I was the world's worst recruiter, and I went to Jack, my boss, and I said, I'm not enjoying this, but I love the team and I want to kind of create something new. And I created the role that I'm in today and created this new department that didn't exist before. But he might not have been able to see that I wanted that path had I not have spoken up and kind of, I guess, shown the initiative to push myself.
Yeah, it's hard to read what's going on in Izzy's mind, right?
No one's psychic.
No one's psychic.
Although I say this to my boyfriend all the time. I'm like, why do you not know what I'm thinking?
Yeah, that's the difference. Yeah, don't want to get into therapy here. But.
Sorry, well, I thought that's what this was.
But yeah, like, you need to vocalize that. And you need to, like you said, you need to take control of your own career. And there's times to do that and times to lean in on that. And there's times to see what else is going on in the business and the organization, and times where there's opportunities that you can like take advantage. But yeah, like, you need to, and also set those seeds, like dog food that, and set the seeds for the future, because change may not come overnight, but hey, this is my direction, or our performance review, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
How can you help me get there? And am I in a position where I can get there? Like, do I have your backing? And ideally, you want to be a company that's growing, so you can grow and you can grow with it, and you can
grow together.
Yeah, and that's probably the biggest challenge, is finding those businesses that like backing the right horse, right? Going back to that kind of betting analogy, is can you back the right horse? And at the time, it's difficult to see the future, obviously, but you need to kind of look for those indicators. Like the people, are you working with smart people?
Yeah.
Is the product interesting? Is the market right for this type of product? From a timing perspective, and all those sometimes are you can't control as an individual. You have to kind of go with your gut, and
but it's about having that informed decision, and not just like going, yep, I think this is what I want to do. Like, actually doing your research and being 100%. Smart with that decision. And 100%. Speaking about change, you've made a huge change in your business. You went from sales and now you're CS.
Yeah.
How did you make that transition? Why? What are some of those skills that you feel like have been consistent through the two roles?
Yep. So how did I make the change? Semi-unintentionally, intentionally, but also probably not the most eloquent answer, but more, I felt like I actually changed, not careers, I changed like domains, if that makes sense. So I was working in ad tech and more MarTech businesses, like really interesting businesses. And that's more where the kind of the Spotify sat. So in like ad sales teams. And I felt like I wanted to challenge myself in industries that were outside of advertising and media. And that's kind of where I went more into the B2B SaaS space. So kind of point in case at Meta, that was like a customer success role in a wider team. And that was in like SaaS, which I had worked in advertising, but not as like pure play SaaS.
Yeah.
And I think, but to be fair, a lot of like the transferable skills, I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but I generally do think, the things that I enjoyed about go-to-market were, like strategic conversations, having that commercial acumen for upsell and renewal and expansion, but also like building relationships with enterprise businesses. And that's something that I still kind of, when I come, boil it down, is things that I really enjoy. And that gives me energy, and that gives me stimulation in the roles that I've had and in my current role as well.
And it takes me back to what you were saying at the beginning of like making sure that you are not just focusing on one thing. And maybe this is where you're a generalist, not a specialist, but you don't have to just go down one linear path. You don't have to just be in sales. I absolutely despise when they say like girls are more CS focused and guys are more in sales. The fact that you've done that transition. That. Have you not?
No.
And you've done it from sales to CS.
Yeah. Okay. Says a lot.
No, but I think that's so great that you don't have to be stuck in something, and you can see elements of, you clearly like enjoyed the partnership side and the relationship building, and that's something that you wanted to foster and go down that path. We want to talk a lot around scaling, not just your career, but your book of business. I know it's something that you're passionate about, and you did a great feature in our newsletter for our retention seekers community. So I'm going to take your mind back. But one of the things that you said is foundations. And I really would love to know, what are the foundations that your CS team need to have in place to impact the output and value for your client in a positive way?
Yeah, good question. I think as a foundation, when you're building or scaling any CS team, I think for me, what I look for is like, do you have the people in place that like the people in seat. So how many companies do you have like clients, and how many people do you have in your team, right? You want that to be like semi-proportional based on bandwidth and expectations. And are you doing a high touch like model or a low touch model or a scale model? And you're not going to have that one-to-one relationship with every client. So you need to kind of segment that. I think you also need to just think foundationally, what tools do you have in place? What CRM are you using? How are you leveraging AI? Like what tooling I think is really important. It's maybe not very sexy, right, to think about, but like what tools do you have in your ammunition that are going to help you to log, are you logging meeting notes on there, triggering, things like QBRs and cadence, touch points, next steps, exec sponsorship, there's a huge breadth of things in CS, which is why it's so interesting, going back to your previous point, but it can be a minefield if you're not tracking that personally, but also for the wider company to see. You've got all that information in your brain, but how do other people tap into that? I think that's probably the biggest secret, I think, with CS is how do you be that communication between your client and the business and the client, and just relaying that information kind of constantly back and forth. I think there are probably two things that I would say is like foundational, and then you would probably conduct that audit of your businesses. And I try and segment clients into, getting a bit technical here, but into like quadrants, if you can picture my quadrant here.
Yeah, beautiful.
But like you've got, on one axis, you've got, it's a bit intense for a Thursday afternoon, this. You've got like, engagement, and then you've got ARR as well. So ideally you want to focus on your one-to-one time on your highest engaged clients with the highest ARR, right? They traditionally would buy a bigger managed service package, and they warrant more of your time, more support hours, better SLAs, etc. The idea is, even on your lower ARR clients who maybe are low engagement, like what is the challenge there? Is it education? Is it self-serve material? Is it a discussion around a feature adoption and et cetera, et cetera? So you always want to have like a playbook for each quadrant and think about it like that. And the idea is that you want to get clients more to that engagement quadrant, obviously. So that reduces churn, and increases adoption. But as we know, clients can shift, and they can 1 minute they can be in a very highly engaged quadrant, and then something can happen, and it's kind of snakes and ladders where they go into a different space here. And that's definitely challenging, and being proactive on that is probably the biggest thing, and trying to preempt that before it happens, because once it's happened, then you're on the back foot. So you always want to be reactive rather than proactive, proactive rather than reactive.
When you're tracking engagement, are you just looking at how vocal they are, and if they're responding to emails and attending your QBRs, or is it more just if they're adopting the platform? Because I liken it to our communities that we run, and I always think, I don't necessarily think that to look at engagement is the people that are the loudest. Some people could just be sitting back a little bit and enjoying and really soaking up value from what we're providing. And similar to in CS, that's exactly the case, but they don't necessarily show it. So how do you differentiate the two?
What they call like armchair warriors or something. Probably me, right? I gather all the information that's coming through, lots of great stuff on the WhatsApp.
I was going to say, you've never said anything.
I think I piped up a few times.
I'm joking.
I think you're looking for, I'd probably answer that question into like two. So you've got like the hard metrics, which is like, how much time are they spending on the platform as a business and an individuals? Is your champion spending, as super users, do you have a cohort of champions and super users that are spending a lot of time on the platform? So what's their stickiness, their engagement rates? You want to see that, obviously increasing the minute it starts plateauing, and there's going to be seasonal changes to that, like Christmas, traditionally beginning of the year, holidays, right? We're in the Easter period right now. So that's going to impact on a day-to-day, but from a quarterly or business review, when you conduct those, you want to ideally see more users on the platform in volume, and obviously more stickiness. I guess that's an obvious point. And feature adoption is a huge part of that. And then what we do is we ask NPS scores, so net promoter scores, which traditionally are activated in the product. So I don't ask that, but that's just initiated in the product. Would you recommend this product to a friend, 0 to 10? But also I think you want to get a little bit more scientific than that and actually start to do like more CSAT, so customer satisfaction surveys, to get a bit more in depth, because a score is quite binary, right? It's just tells you what that number is. It doesn't really go into detail. So, why have you given a 5? Is it something we've done? Am I not aware of it? Was it to do with a delay? Why did you give a 10, right? And or why did you give an 8? And how do we get to a 10? So also one step further is we have an exec sponsorship program in my business currently right now, and we ask the execs who are traditionally the economic buyer what they would score the NPS. And traditionally those people aren't on the platform. They're the economic bias, but they have a team that are using the platform on a day-to-day basis. So it's really interesting to kind of marry up the kind of executives stakeholders score with the champions and the end users, and kind of aggregate that together. And hopefully the two should be fairly similar. When they're not, if that's where there's a disconnect. And so I think there's kind of the hard metrics piece and then the soft metrics, and you get a feel as well. You're speaking to clients, if they're unresponsive, if they are not attending meetings, if their tone, and we live in a virtual world, so it's quite difficult, if their tone is, quite dismissive and, they're impatient, they've got deadlines, you can indicate, you can get an understanding of what is up, and, how do you uncover that, and what you're going to do about it is probably that's the bigger challenge.
We've all been ghosted before. We know what it means.
Yep, exactly.
We know the signs. This is really interesting. This is like where your sales side is definitely coming out, because a few years ago, I'm going to quote Johnny Burgoyne, who works at Darktrace, and he said that his best question in the discovery stage as an AE is, out of 1 to 10, what number would you say you're at in terms of 10 being I'm going to buy this product and 1 being we're not interested at all? And then get them to give a number. And then when they say that number, go, okay, so how can we get you from that 6 to a 10? And that's exactly what you said there is throughout those CSAT scores, like how can we get you from a 5 to a 10? And really ask them those questions that might be uncomfortable, because otherwise you're just going to be guessing, like how do I get them to that 10? And often they might not be sharing everything of what they're thinking, and you really need to uncover that, which the sales side comes into this role, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's just that strategic, being consultative, right? I think my favorite question is why. And if you dig why to like 3 or 4 levels, you'll actually get a more in-depth answer. So like, why did you buy a product? Because ... Okay, why? What does that mean? Because we ... And then you really scratch beneath, you peel back the onion, right? For want of a better analogy. And I think that's really crucial. Sometimes the client knows it. Sometimes the client doesn't know it. Doesn't know exactly why they bought it. They may have inherited a product from a different part of the business. Traditionally with big businesses, there's, they may not be involved in that buying decision. So they may be, RFPing multiple different vendors. So I think you can shy away from those questions. So the person that you mentioned in a more of a sales role, you can shy away, but that's a very direct way of like understanding where do I stand with this client, and your gut can normally indicate roughly where that is. But I think that next question is, how do we get there, is probably the more important diagnosis. And what can I do to get you there? And I guess if that person got a 1, he knows not to waste their time, and it's not the right buying opportunity.
And it's great to sometimes get in there, because you're like, well, I don't want to waste any more of my time on this if it's never going to get
some people
anywhere.
don't always give that honest answer because they're afraid of upsetting people and not giving their honest feelings. But I think, radical candor, I think it's just important just to be straight up and
100%.
No hard feelings, but here's why it's a 1. And we're just not in the position to buy right now, rather than leading people down a garden path, and you're just kind of wasting people's time, right?
Definitely. You mentioned AI and the tools that you're using. I know we could do a whole episode on this, but is there something that you could share on the kind of tools that you're seeing great success with to make sure that there is that single source of truth and communication between the customer and your team?
Yeah, really good question. I'm trying racking
You're
my
like,
brain now.
Who are we using?
I think,
and what can I share?
More. I think it's the automation piece, which from a CS perspective it can be a challenge, because you've got a certain amount of time in the day, and you can spend all day in meetings, but that's maybe not the best use of your time. So what's, the best use of your client time, maybe is to have FaceTime with you, but how can you, like I said, play that, relay that information internally so that people can do something. And like I said, to do meetings, to then follow up, that can take, that can take a lot of time if you've got X number of clients and you're trying to like document that information. So I think the first one is like it's a simple one, but having a note taker on your call. I know when we had a call yesterday, you had it, and it can be a little bit freaky, but at the same time,
so helpful.
It's very helpful, right?
Yeah.
That just saves you time and synthesizes that information, what's most important. So, Microsoft, I think have got Copilot, Zoom have got a couple, and others, all the big kind of VC players have got their own version of that. And I think that's really important.
We use Tiller, shout out to them.
There we go.
Startup.
They're a corporate partner.
They are sponsoring this podcast.
There we go. And then I think it's the obvious ones like ChatGPT, OpenAI, I think it's obviously really important. Just if you want to, use financial information in there and try and synthesize like content, making content more concise. Talk tracks can be really important, or understanding playbooks. That's obviously really important. And we use a couple of internal platforms, not internal, but internally we use them. They're one's called Churn Zero. That's I don't think they're a corporate partner, but they are.
Churn Zero.
Churn Zero, yeah. Have you heard? Okay.
No, I've not heard of them.
I would say it's like a Salesforce for customer success.
Okay.
So there's quite a few variations of different customer success platforms. That's the one that traditionally we've used. And yeah, they've got different AI features of their, to just automate things, sending information out to a large scale of people, right? Especially like, content, one to many kind of type content.
Yeah.
That can be really helpful. And the other ones that it was on the tip of my tongue is I've forgotten, and it will come back to me.
Clearly not doing very well with it,
no.
are you?
Dovetail, there we go. So when we read, when we do like customer surveys, so I work very closely with our our product managers and our kind of like UX and UI designers, and we'll show them a feature, we'll like demonstrate something new and shiny and exciting in the platform that might be in beta. We'll use Dovetail to document like the key features, what they mentioned, the type of information they said on the call, and then that can like turn it into insights as well. So
really
I think it's multi-threaded, right?
Yeah.
I think AI is going to obviously touch a lot of SaaS products, and it's just how you can use it to advantage, but without being super creepy, but still have that customer success personalized. But I guess
definitely it's interesting though, because customer success, it is very much a people function, so you don't want it to take over, but there's absolutely a need for it. As you said, there's the admin side of things just takes, and nobody likes updating the CRM or doing any of that, so this can just take so much of that time away and more time to focus on the important things. And the last point on scaling your book of business that you wrote in this article, and feel free to add if you've got any more, now it's a few months past, but you said was working with pre-sales to get visibility on sales pipeline and expectations. How do you do this?
Yeah, it's always a challenge. I think sales are traditionally hunters. They go out, they look for new businesses. They want to spend the bulk of their time probably not doing the admin.
Yeah.
Even though I wouldn't classify that as admin, it's that handover. And I think it's really important to do those handovers, not just verbally for half an hour and then kind of, you dance off into the distance, but actually to spend time understanding kind of who the key stakeholders are that you're going to be engaging with, but also like who do they report into, and just have a visibility of that kind of seniority. Even though you may not be engaging with this person, you just need to know who they are and what their kind of skin in the game is. A lot of people will buy products, they'll rest a lot of their career on it. We've had certain clients that will get promoted because of the value that they've done, right? So what does it mean for them if this succeeds? But also what does this mean for them if it doesn't succeed? And that can be, very, like in-depth CS questions. So just having like a very rich handover report at the moment, my business, we call it like a win report, just to document, who is the target audience or who the personas you're speaking to. What were their pain points initially before buying? Why did they buy? What critical milestones are you working towards? And just like build up a really rich picture so that you can have as much lay of the land as possible, so that when you go onto that first kind of kickoff call with a client, you can show that you've done your due diligence and you've done your homework, and you're kind of there at that point verifying your information. So I know this about your business. This is what I have to like in my bank of knowledge. Am I right? Is there anything missing here? Has there been any change, right? And that could be quite a good question because things can change very quickly, and actually stakeholders may have left, and actually new stakeholders may be looking after the project. So you just want to have the source of truth at all times.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where I think handovers can slip through the cracks, to be perfectly honest. If you haven't got that like robust handover process in place, it can be detrimental to the project and also to, you know, anyone in CS that wants to achieve that success. So it's that you don't want to have a false start. I think that's probably the most important thing. It's how you start is going to kind of lead you for the foundations for future success.
And you want that transition for the customer to be as seamless as possible, as if they're working with the same business, not two different businesses.
They want continuity, guidance, trust, advisory.
Because to them, you are just the company. You're not two different teams. They want to have one relationship and that's it. And you mentioned a really great point there on the stakeholders. I think with the way that the market is at the moment and people leaving, they often say like multiple stakeholders for sales, but with CS, how many would you say that you would be wanting to have from that handover?
Ideally, you want to go as senior as you can, right? You want to try and punch above your weight. You know, you want to try and get as much stakeholder influence as possible. So I'd say in an ideal world, you want to get, you know, the executive sponsor, and that's something you want to tee up in advance. You know, who is going to be our sponsor for this account? They're not going to be coming to every nitty gritty meeting, but maybe they'll be ideally at QBRs. So who's that economic buyer? Who does this tool software ultimately report into?
Right.
And traditionally they're a C-suite. Right. So, you know, in previous at Meta, chief, you know, CIO, or a, you know, chief HR officer, or in my current business, a chief information security officer, someone with a C kind of before their title. And then it then comes down to their kind of next in command. So the person that maybe is like the director, once again, not the probably doing the actual technical pieces, but maybe pulling the strings and reporting into that executive sponsor because they're ultimately accountable. And then really importantly, to have that champion super user tool owner that is going to live and breathe your product, that has real skin in the game, that has a certain type of juice to them. They really need to understand that this is going to, most new tools implemented in big businesses have to go through digital transformation. And there's a framework that I use called ADKAR, which I can spell it, but I'll probably mess it up. But awareness, desire, knowledge, critical event, something and something, I'll remember it. But
it's like good spelling. ADKAR. No, that was
but
right.
It's the transformation of how you can get buy-in.
Right.
And any new tool in a big business is going to take time to embed itself, right? Process and stakeholders. So you want that tool owner to have influence, to have juice, so they can start to orchestrate change in their business. And then you have tool users who are not necessarily, you know, your kind of super user network, who are spotlighting use cases. Oh, I can do this with it, and I'm interested in finding out this, and can I have a training session or enablement? Where do I get this information? You want to have that level of excitement. And if you're not getting that in that first kind of 60, 90, 120 day period, it can be difficult to drum that up. So some clients, it's quite organic that they've got this governance structure in place. Other times you have to be a bit more forthcoming and start to say, hey, to be successful, we are going to need this and this resource allocated to this, because in the past we've seen this not work, and you have to be a bit more forthcoming with that. So,
and those super users could be the crucial feedback for you on
100%.
what you need to do to develop to make the partnership more successful.
Adam,
you've given so much insight for both career and your book of business. Thank you so much for coming on. But as we end every episode on Sales Unfiltered, what is one challenge that you faced in your life or career that's really shaped you to where you are today?
It's a good question. I think life and career blends itself, not to be too philosophical, but
we're in therapy. Come on.
The foundations are you obviously want to be happy, right? You want to enjoy what you do. You don't want those, Sunday blues. You want to wake up. You want to feel valued, rewarded, appreciated. All of that for me, hygiene factors. But I think the biggest like career learning curve that I've had is actually setting up my own consultancy. It sounds more glamorous than it was, but it was a boutique advisory and consultancy business where I took a lot of my learnings and basically started to consult for scale-ups, mostly and startups in B2B and tech for good and health and well-being, those kind of industries. And yeah, I was actually sat at WeWork around here X number of years ago with 0 clients, no website, no presence, no deck, just me and a laptop. I hadn't even set up a company on Company's House. Oh, wow. And I just didn't know where to start. And that was exciting, but daunting. And I think going through those motions, doing your first proposal, understanding how to commercialize what you do and just going through those growing pains. I hadn't had the playbook. I was kind of learning a bit on the fly, to be perfectly honest, but trying to do it with a professional demeanor. That was super challenging. And you learn very quickly what works and what doesn't work and where you can start to, and I think that, like you said, those opportunities are where you grow the most.
Would you do it again?
I would, yeah. If I'm being honest, yeah. I think probably a slightly later point in my career. But I think, it goes back to, for me, the core of like helping businesses and that entrepreneurial versus intrapreneurial mindset. And I think I've long time wanted to be an entrepreneur, but actually seeing the value you can have as an intrapreneur is really rewarding, and it's still super fulfilling. You can still get to a really interesting level in your career. Yeah. So yeah, just helping startups is kind of my DNA.
I love that, and I'm glad that you said that with an entrepreneur, because I feel like people feel like they have to choose either working for a company or being an entrepreneur, and actually there is that middle ground.
I think so.
And it's a bit safer.
Yeah, to some extent. You're not maybe working on weekends and carrying the burden of other people's
You've got a salary,
worries.
It's a bit, a bit more stable and taking less risks. As you said, whatever point in your life you are.
Correct.
But excited to see maybe this in the future, and also for your future sponsorship with San Pellegrino.
Yes, if you're watching.
Cannot wait to see that happen.
Big fan of the orange edition.
Great. Thank you so much, Adam,
Pleasure.
for coming on. Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sales Unfiltered. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would love for you to hit the subscribe button. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a quick review. See you next week.